I mean, I think in Asia in general, there is a much bigger emphasis on respect and like kind of a hierarchy. I don't speak Japanese, and so I can't talk about that. But like in from the Tagalog perspective, there are like respect particles that you add to sentences if you're speaking with someone that's older than you. There's also titles that you give people, like you would refer to someone who's older than you as either your older brother or your older sister. You wouldn't use their name. Like if I was speaking to like a lady in her 40s, I wouldn't say like her name. I would just call her by this title, and that was something that as an English speaker was hard for me to kind of grasp because we don't really use that in English. Like the whole idea of like Mr. and Mrs. is even like a bit outdated. I feel like in like Canada and the
I
US
never
these
used
days.
that myself.
No, and even as a kid, I was like, that's weird, and so it was hard for me to kind of learn that. And so like for your experience learning Japanese in the US, like most of the time was just in the US, and I imagine that a lot of the people you were talking to were these students who were the same age as you. Like, was it hard when you went to Japan and then were speaking to like people that were older? Like, was that a register that you weren't used to practicing, or how did you learn about that like respect hierarchy in like from the States?
I mean, I think I picked up a lot of it pretty well just because I had watched so much Japanese media. Like I just consumed like thousands of hours of Japanese TV shows and like read Japanese novels. So like I had enough exposure through the media that like I pretty much knew how it worked. The thing that in Japan, there's basically three registers. There's like casual speech that you use with people that are equal to you or below you. Then there's polite speech, which you use for basically someone you just met or like someone that you're on a work relationship with. And then there's like truly honorific speech, and you really only use that in like a work environment. And so for me, I don't really, to this day, I have almost no opportunities to speak that like that honorific language, because like unless I was at a Japanese company dealing with clients, or I was working at a Japanese restaurant or a store dealing with customers, I wouldn't use that like highest honorific level. I mean, I can still like kind of speak it for, if I try to for fun, just because like, I've studied it like, through study, but so I'm still not very good at that one. But the middle one is actually not very hard to do, the like polite one, because you really just take the base one and then tack on a suffix at the end of every sentence, essentially.
And what does it attach to? Does it attach to the verb then?
So it's either like you conjugate the verb into a certain form, or if it's a noun, then you just tack on des at the end. Like if you ever heard des in like Japanese, like so desu ne. Like there's like a certain sentence ender that just makes it polite. And so it's pretty easy to just figure out how to tack those on in your head. In fact, in Japanese textbooks, they actually teach that first. So that just, if you only take the first lesson and then go to Japan and speak to somebody, you're not being rude. It's kind of like safe to learn the polite version. So actually that was the very first thing that I learned. So like, yeah, I knew I could do that. The thing that to this day trips me up is so like I can speak casual Japanese, no problem, obviously. That's most of the Japanese I've spoken has been I'm speaking casual, they're speaking casual back to me. I can speak polite Japanese almost just as well. Like I don't feel quite as comfortable with it. Not for linguistic like language ability reasons, just purely for like, I feel like there's like a barrier between us if we're both speaking polite Japanese, right? It means that we haven't like opened ourselves up and decided we're gonna like put that to the side and just be ourselves, right? So I kind of have this desire of like if we're actually gonna be friends, I'm like, okay, let's switch to casual Japanese. If it's just someone on the street, or I'm just talking to I'm talking to the person taking the order at the restaurant, it's like feels totally natural. Nothing, you don't really think anything of it. But the thing that to this day still feels kind of weird to me is when there's someone who is like lower status than me or is younger than me, and they're speaking polite to me, but I'm supposed to speak casual back. And then there's this imbalance, and that's totally normal in Japanese society. It happens all the time. So the Japanese person it feels totally normal to them. But for me, I almost feel like I'm like looking down on them, or like, I'm like getting constantly reminded that we're not on equal footing because I'm speaking casual and they're speaking polite back to me. There's this like imbalance, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable to this day. Like the part of me is like, just stop speaking polite to me, just speak casual to me, so that then I feel like we're on the same level and we're closer. But I was just talking about this to my Japanese girlfriend the other day, and she was like, because she was telling me about her like really close friend, and she was like quoting her friend, and it was in polite Japanese. I was like, wait, this close friend speaks polite Japanese to you? I was like, yeah, well, we originally met because we worked at the same restaurant, and she was 1 year younger than me. And I was like, yeah, but you're just friends now. She's like, yeah, but we've been speaking this way for so long, it would be awkward if we changed it now. Like, I don't think anything of it. It's just totally normal. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting, because like for me, that still would feel weird. Like, I can't just think nothing of the fact that I'm speaking like casually and they're speaking polite back to me.
Yeah, like I think learning to speak in a different way is like it's just a part of language learning. What makes the politeness difficult in languages is that it's subject to change. Like if you just always spoke the polite version to every person you ever met, it would be so easy to learn and to practice, and you would know exactly what to use all the time. But the fact that it's like, oh, with this person we're going to speak like this, and then with this person we're going to speak like that, that's where it gets hard. Like, and I think Japanese, by the sounds of it, has a much more complex kind of hierarchy system than the languages that I've studied. But like it exists in almost all languages except English to a certain degree. Like I also speak Spanish because my girlfriend is from Colombia. And so they have the usted form, which is like the formal version to talk to people. And when I took Spanish in university, I had learned that this formal version was for people you don't know or people that are older than you. And with your friends and your family, you're going to speak like super informal. And I think that is the case for a lot of Spanish-speaking countries. But then I went to Colombia, and I noticed that everybody uses the formal speech with everybody. Like friends use it with friends, family members use it with family members. Almost the only exception is if you are like a romantic couple. So like a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, they wouldn't use it with each other. But almost without exception, you use the formal speech with everybody else in your life. And that was so hard for me to get used to because I hadn't learned, like it's a different verb conjugation. And so like I hadn't been thinking that I would need to use these different forms. And it's funny, like you'll see Colombian people, like let's say like two people are like having road rage and yelling at each other on the street. They'll use the formal. They'll be like cállense or something like that, like shut up, but in the formal version. And it's like, oh, even when you're like insulting people, it still has to have this lens of politeness. And yeah, it's tricky because then when I speak with, like if I'm with my girlfriend and her family, I would need to address her informally, and I would need to address everybody else formally. So where I'm at, like every verb is conjugated differently depending if I'm talking to her or if I'm talking to her family. And that's been hard for me. Even like now, after like years of that, it's still challenging for me to kind of switch.
Yeah, that's funny. In Japan, if a Japanese person is like, has a road rage and they're like yelling at someone else, it would not be polite. It would be like the most rude form. Generally. Although it's probably super rare for a Japanese person to have road rage in the first place because they're generally pretty mild most of the time. But yeah, I mean it's super interesting to hear for other languages too.